Okay, welcome everyone to our third installment of this family history genealogy series that is being led by Sarah Gutmann, who's been doing such a great job. She is a genealogist, and her website is right here. It's thefamilytreeclimber.com. And today we're going to be talking about how to find your female ancestors, who can sometimes get a little hidden in the record and be a little trickier to find. So welcome, Sarah. Thanks everyone for joining us, and let's do it.
All right. Thank you very much for a lovely introduction, and please extend my thank you to the Poughkeepsie Library for allowing me to come here today to chat about one of my favorite topics. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you're on your lunch break or something fun. And my name is Sarah Gutmann. I am a professional genealogist. My own company is the Family Tree Climber, and I also work for the top-rated genealogy firm Legacy Tree. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm coming from actually in my basement on Long Island. But I am a Poughkeepsie grad from Marist College, so I'm very familiar with the lovely area up there. So today we're going to be focusing on our female ancestors. It's a nice way to end Women's History Month. So oftentimes, and I think we're all maybe guilty of it, I know I am, that when we look at our family tree, we're really focusing on the men. And that, primarily is because they are actually much easier to find in the record collection. People are also usually interested in their last name line. Mine is, and you're going to learn a lot about my family in the next hour. My maiden name is Gadati. So I was always interested in especially researching that line. But females make up 50% of the population. Actually, if you look closer to records, they actually make up about 51% of the population. And they make up 50% of our family tree. And I'm just seeing if we have any men today on our thing. We don't, and as though I love the men, we can talk freely now because we're ladies here. So, by the way, this program is for you. I'm going to pass the slides along to the library so you don't have to worry about taking notes down. But of course, you're allowed to. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask. Sometimes I can't see the chat, and so don't think that I'm ignoring you. Just feel free to unmute yourself and we could talk. It's really, for you, very informal. So with that, we'll get started. So some of the things we're going to talk about today is the importance of knowing your history. So I hope you kind of paid a little bit of attention, at least in high school, to get a sense of history. And I'll show you how to look at some local area history to kind of get to know your ancestors better. I'm going to send you on a scavenger hunt, maybe in your own house, maybe in another family member's house, maybe in a distant cousin's house. And let's just hope that nobody calls the police on anybody. So we're going to go on a little scavenger hunt. We'll look at some marriage records, because that's the #1 place that you're going to find information on women, the most telling of the record collection. How to find her in other forms of print, books, newspapers, yearbooks, the lineage societies that are available, and the way to track them down. I'm laughing because I was just talking to my friend about lineage societies, and I asked her, and this is just a side comment, does anybody have any idea what the hardest lineage society is to get into? Anybody have any idea the hardest lineage society to get into?
I mean, the DAR seems like it's a real challenge from the people.
It is a bit challenging. Anybody else? No, okay. It's called the Royal Bastards. That's the name of the lineage society, and it is the descendants of people of illegitimate. They're the illegitimate children of royalty, to trace them back. And I'm thinking about this because about 15 minutes before I came on this conversation, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I asked her if she knew the answer to this, and she said the Society of Jesus, and I was like, that's not even a thing. So she's just making up lineage societies. Anyway, we'll talk about the men in her life, because we do have to give credit to men. They are important to all of us in some way, shape, or form. So we'll talk about our ancestors' men. We'll find out what's available out there, so we're not looking at places that we wouldn't find our female ancestors. We'll talk about the law and how that's important and how that's also going to play into where we're going to find her. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the best DNA tests that you can get that focuses primarily on that maternal line. So with that, let's hop over to history for a second. Now, a lot of times in genealogy, we spend a lot of our resources, if you will, trying to figure out the names, the dates, and the places. And quite often, and again, this is something I'm guilty of it, is you're just focusing on birthday, marriage day, death day. But I don't know about the rest of you, but I had a lot more, I mean, I'm not even dead yet, but I've had a lot more exciting events in my life than just 2 of those days. You know, there's a lot about me. But what we want to do is figure out what was going on during that time periods, those time periods of birth, marriage, death, whatever, and place our female ancestors in context. Now, I just kind of found some pictures here that made me think of my own family. My grandma, she was born in 1929, so she was a child of the Great Depression. She lived in Yonkers, New York, and during the Depression, she had to get money for her family. So she used to work. She was 6 years old. She would leave work. She would leave school. She would go to school for 2 hours, and then leave school. And she would go and work in a in a factory for dresses and put buttons in them on the machines. And because of child labor laws, they knew that there were children working there. So at a certain point of the day when the foreman would go past, they had all the kids go and hide in the bathroom stalls. And my grandma tells stories, she used to have to stand on top of the toilet. So when they would look under, they wouldn't see her. But again, knowing that grandma was a child of the Great Depression kind of triggers, okay, what was going on in her life in a relatively city-based like community? That's going to be different than somebody who's living out in farming area during that time period. Somebody who's living out, when you think of like the Grapes of Wrath, maybe if they're in that Dust Bowl area, how's that going to play into their story? One of my ancestors was very big on women's rights. You know, you think about even like what's going on in the legislation at that time. What might have they been very involved in? Of course, African Americans, they had their own kind of lineage story going on. We don't even see them, unfortunately, in the records until 1870. That's when we really first start seeing African Americans and trying to, again, get a picture of their story. And you know, just figure that into, I have the American Revolution. Again, you folks are up in really the beautiful Hudson Valley, where so much history went on during that time period. And even that, you have a very different, the people in that area in the Hudson Valley have a very different experience than people who were on Long Island, because they were ruled under loyalists. And up there, they were mainly patriots. So that's also a big difference, knowing something like that, how they're going to play into it. So you can look at local my thing was hitting the power plug and I didn't want to just shut off my computer on everybody. So you can look at local historical events, and no history will tell you how about her story. So that's, you know, a little play on words, but it's important to think about. So now I'm going to send you on a little scavenger hunt. Women are kind of by our nature, we're the collectors. We gather things. I'm not sure about you or maybe your ancestors. I know my mom has a lot of different collections that she inherited from my grandma. And I took some pictures around the house. Some of these are not mine, but they're pictures that are similar to this. Over here is a 1905 Singer sewing machine. And does anybody have this in their house, or has maybe seen in somebody else's house? No? Okay. If you had this sewing machine, you were able to make clothes. And that was extremely important because that just gave you an upper hand on things, that you're able to make your own clothes. And not everybody had this. There's actually a picture in the Tenement Museum in New York City. My family had lived there. My paternal family had lived there at the turn of the century. And there's a picture of my great-great-grandma in the museum with making the sewing machines with this, just sitting around the table. And I think that's such a cool thing, you know, to think about. And she had the neighborhood kids, because it said, and her neighbors were over there making clothes. So just to have that, it's really a nice thing. And does anybody ever have one of these little weird pine coney gnome Christmas ornaments? Has anyone ever seen them? My mother's, no. My mother's tree is covered in these, and she hates them, but she can't get rid of them because they've been passed down to her. Holidays are known for these family traditions. And this ornament here, I guess, was popular between the 1920s and the 1940s, these little weird Christmas gnome guys. And they were my great-great-grandmas. And you think about all of the holidays that were shared during this time, the memories that were made, you know, with these, I don't want to call them creatures, but, you know, pinecone men, that they kind of overlooked. And it's just a way, again, of holding something that was a family member's and just kind of connecting yourself through that generational tie. My grandma also had a big collection of children's books that she had from when my other grandma, she was born in 1918. And some of these were like first edition, which, you know, are very cool in and of itself. But if you have these books, oftentimes people would write their names on the inside cover. You get to see their signature on them. Sometimes they'll date when they get it. And it's cute, you know, to hold something. I have them actually in the closet behind me here. That was, you know, my grandma's kind of putting them in another place in time. You know, you often think of them as these older people, but remember that they were once little kids too, and learning from them. Jewelry was also, you know, it still is today, very popular and can tell a story. And what I'm a big fan of doing is going to a local jeweler, if you haven't, they do this for free, and just say, hey, I have some jewelry. Would you be able to tell me the time period that this is in? I had some pieces that I thought were from the 1940s, but they were actually from the 1880s. So I don't really have I don't have a future in jewelry making because I'm very bad at that. But it was really cool because I can think, okay, you know, who would have been wearing this? And who might have this belonged to? Because my mom has all this stuff in a box and she has no idea, but looking for them. And then you can look at old pictures and see if you can spot them on there. Also to flatware and china, linens, candlesticks were also something that was very valuable to our ancestors and that were passed down. I have tons of these gold. I'm really bad at describing things. These gold laced pots, and that's all from my family's had brought it down. I actually have a whole thing of it up in my attic because I don't have anywhere to put it. And finally, this creepy doll. This is not the actual doll. This is a terrifying looking doll, if I do say so myself. But my grandma, her 5-year-old sister died. I'm sorry. When my grandma was 7, her 5-year-old sister died, okay, in 1925. And her sister's name was Harriet, and my grandma for her entire life held on to Harriet's doll. And Harriet's doll is in my mom's house. And it's just something that, meant a lot to my grandma, and this girl that never had a chance to grow up. It's just kind of like a keepsake of her, it makes her a real person. You just think about that. Even these and of course my mom has all these are like Dresden dolls. She's got Hummel. She's got them all. But again, this meant something to somebody also too. And it might even reflect like their ethnicity background, where they're getting it from. So keep that in mind. Just remember that these items tell a story. And I'm realizing that this says have it appraised. Don't do that. I don't even know what that is. That's a typo as I'm staring at this word here. Have it appraised. Unless I hit a button on my fat fingers here while I was switching a screen. So yeah, have it appraised, get a sense of it. And it's just, thinking about a story. So another great resource for your family are pictures. Now, this is a little audience participation. I'm going to do several little audience participations here. And I was a teacher for years, so I'm used to awkward silences while everyone's waiting. So I will wait for you until you actually give me an answer. Now, I have 3 pictures here. And anybody, let's take the center picture for a second. Feel free to unmute yourself. Looking at the center picture, can anybody tell me about anything that they may notice from this picture?
It was taken in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, great. That was taken in Pennsylvania, which is a really nice, it's actually a really nice clue that they have that on there.
Are those twins?
You know what? They're not twins, but they
Yeah.
look like they're very close in age, right? How many girls are in this picture?
Hard to tell. They dressed boys in dresses for a long time.
Yes.
Only one. One?
Yes, there's only one. And I just learned, oh, hold on a second. We just have to, hold on. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay. Sorry, my son just got stuck. He's sitting next to me, so if he stands up, he falls over. So one of the clues, I had just found this out. I thought this is so cool. Do you know the difference of how you can tell boys and girls in dresses apart from one another?
The haircut, the hairdo?
Yeah, what in particular about the hairdo?
Maybe this part?
Yes, it's the part. Yeah, and
Oh, smart. All right.
very good. I always wish like you were the person and I had like lollipops or something to give people to. Like,
You know what? I do sewing, so I mean, maybe I just recognize, like I know, with the dresses, I see them.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Very
yeah, they all look the same, except that that they all got the same look.
Yeah, and the girl in the back just looks like, that's my great grandma back here, Romana, and that's when I popped over for a second. Oh, and I see some things in chat. Hold on, let me visit them. Okay. Oh, I've seen people about the Singer sewing machine. Very good. Oh, thank you. Very cute. I'm just reading the comments on it, and I like all that. Like I said, I wasn't ignoring you. I just couldn't see you until this 5 seconds ago. What do you think maybe their life was like as far as the industry that they were involved in?
Mining.
What gave you that clue?
Coalport, Pennsylvania, but they also, yeah.
Well, yeah. Very good. And also they're farmers. They're farmers and miners. Why are they not smiling?
Because the exposures took too long.
Yes, right. That's another way you can tell the age of things, because people, if you recall, you've probably seen the movies when they have the old photographers, they would put that cover over their head and they would like, stay still. And then so they're not mad. I mean, they may have been mad. I have no idea what was going on at the time, but there was nobody behind them shaking toys to have everybody smile. I'm kind of jealous of those days. So that's another way that you can date photos based on the expression of people. I've been asked.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Sarah, I was just going to ask, the clothes are different than many of the pictures that I've seen where you have formal portraits. They're so like patterned and plaids and flowers, and that's different for me to see that, but I don't know what the meaning would be.
I think they were probably making it themselves. This was not a very wealthy family, so they would not have had the resources to do that. So that's another thing. Like, this is probably the best clothes that they owned. This photo was taken. Oh, that was my other thing. Any idea when this photo was taken?
$1890s?
Yes, very good. 1890s. Sometimes I get answers, I love it, between 1800 and 1950, and I'm like, yes. You're cheating. Yeah. Yes, it was taken in the 1890s. Now, here's another, this is the easiest question. How many children do you say?
3.
3.
We're
Good.
not sure.
Good. You see 3. So.
Well,
Well, could it be the older daughter holding 3 younger children?
That's a good question. Yeah, but it is the mother. I will say that. But yes, it's 3 kids, 3 little kids.
Yeah.
This lady, Monica, had 10 kids. So knowing that age, you know, you think, okay, did she just take her 3 best looking kids and have them in the photo? I hope not, because they're really not that great looking. So likely you can pinpoint a picture by the ages of the kids in there and who's in there based on their ages. So that's a cool trick to remember. Now, and also too, you could look for, I'm not really seeing anything here, but any type of jewelry that's standing out. I have another picture. I couldn't get it because it wasn't like the best quality, but you can see she's wearing more jewelry. And I always am looking at the jewelry of one of my ancestors to see if I can find that in somebody's house. You know, somebody in my family, not like, you know, I went to a friend's house for dinner and I'm looking for jewelry. How about this picture over here? You can see my mouse moving. Anybody want to tell me about this person, maybe where this might be taken as far as the era, community, what you might know about them?
1940s or 50s, and they had money because that's a fur.
Yep, perfect, yeah.
Looks like they might have been at church. I don't know. That
Yeah, you know,
big
I keep
building on the side.
thinking about that because it does look like a church, and it's very possible it could be. And this is pictures 1949. And that's my grandma, my 91-year-old grandma. She always took a lot of pride in her look. She's still alive. She always took a lot of pride in her look. She always looked like Elizabeth Taylor. Now she looks like Robert De Niro, which is, we would, God forbid, we would never tell her that, but we always like joke about it. So anyway, if you look at her, and if you could tell, she hasn't painted on her lips, like right here has the lipstick. And her eyebrows are like very pruned. Like the coif of her hair is just so, I think she's wearing pearl earrings, very into her appearance. And that's something that's has always been very important to her. And you can kind of get a sense, you know, clothes do kind of tell a little story about people. So I'm just going to put out there that I apologize to my future descendants because I look like a hot mess in a lot of photos. So yeah, and then again in Yonkers, somebody else had brought up that you can also tell by the power lines about a possible when a picture was taken. And I was like, oh, I never thought to think about that.
She's also probably not in Arizona too.
Yes, yeah, and the types of trees and the weather that's happening in the background. Yeah, very good, Chip. Okay, now this one here, I'm gonna just put it out there. This one is a little tricky, like a lot tricky. Okay. Can anybody tell me what do you think is going on in this photo? Maybe some information about it.
Well, there's a ship called the Olympic, but you don't actually know whether it's like transatlantic or a ferry. So it could be local transportation or bigger. I just don't know.
It also looks like a photo op though, like something they would do at Coney Island or something.
Oh, that's a good point.
Ellie, where were you a couple of years ago when I was going crazy trying to figure this out? Okay. You are absolutely right. This photo was taken at Coney Island.
Uh-huh.
This photo, and I think I've talked about this. I think I mentioned this earlier about in another class about my my husband has this mystery great grandfather. Okay, this is the mystery great grand. So, and this kid looks like a kid to me. Like he does not look old enough to have it. So my husband's aunt was the one who gave this to me and told me this is the only picture of the family that we have. So for years, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, who is this Olympic ship? You know what? Because I knew they were from Germany. So finally, I Googled this, and it turned out this was a Coney Island backdrop. They went to Coney Island, they had these costumes there, and they put them on, and they took their pictures because they probably went to Coney Island a lot more in their informal clothes. And so I was just like, are you kidding me with this? Because I think a lot of times, though, what it does is we forget that our ancestors like to have fun. And this is a little memory of that too. You know, they probably had a nice day out and it's like, oh, look, let's take this picture by this boat, whatever. And it was printed on postcard paper. You could send a postcard of it, and that was one of the things that they would do. They would print it on that, and you could have sent it, you know, to whoever and say, like, we had a great time at Coney Island, but it didn't say Coney Island on the back. So, but great job, Kelly.
Thank you.
Kelly, you're doing it. All right. All right, so some things to look for when you're looking at photos are the people who are in them, the number of people who are in them, what are they wearing, any street signs that you see, any type of landmarks, whether it's maybe a bridge in the background, a church, the weather, like you said about, it's not in Arizona because you see the snow. And I mean, it made snow in, or is it, wow, I just made up a state, Arizona, but I don't know. Check out for cars, make, model, and year. There are some websites out there where you can take your picture that you have, upload it, and it like tells you the car in the background. I haven't tried this yet, but I guess there's websites for everything. I don't know. The type of photo, is it on a postcard paper? Is it a tintype? Is it a Polaroid? That's going to give you a sense of when it was taken and also where it was taken. Those photographer stamps that you saw, the one that had Colport, if you had just seen, because some of them have just these names here of the photographer, there are several websites out there that give you, you can put in, I think you can either upload the stamp or you can write the name in and it'll tell you the time and the location of where this photographer was in business. And that's really helpful if you've inherited a big box of photos and you have no idea what you're looking at. That's something to play around with. Again, any words like the Olympic, that's going to give you a, clue that they're just being silly. And those are all things that you can play around with. Another place that you would often find your female ancestors are in old recipe books. Anybody have any of these old recipe books around their house? Yeah. Yes. No. Okay. So women, not me, because I'm an awful cook and I just microwave everything or open a box of cereal. Lots of women spend a very large portion of their day preparing meals. And especially, before we had this convenience of ovens and things like that and refrigerators, a large part of their day was preparing meals for their family. And these meals reflected the culture, especially if they're coming from another country, the culture that was shared, passed down from generation to generation. And if you think about all the stories and the memories that are held, even in our day, just around a meal, a table, holidays, I'm sure everybody for some type of holiday in your family have a particular, maybe a dish that, you have to have. Aunt Mary's, I don't know, pineapple casserole, because my mom loves a stupid pineapple casserole. And that has to be there, and that's a reflection of the culture. Keep an eye out in some of these old writings for in the margins, people will cross things out or they'll write new things in, because maybe when they came over to this country, things were not available. They didn't have the certain herb, so they had to substitute it. Also think about, was this happening during a time of rationing? Is it World War I, World War II, 2020? You don't have toilet paper, whatever. Is there rationing going on? I'll tell you a little story. When my grandma died, the one who's born 1918, she died when I was 7 years old. I was very close with her. And I don't remember anything about her cooking. So when I got my own house, my aunt gave me my grandma's old recipes. So I thought it'd be a really nice thing to have everybody in my family come over and I'm going to make all of grandma's old recipes, right? No. So I made all this stuff. I had them all over and they're sitting there, and you just tell when people think something is just disgusting, right? So I'm like, I am so sorry. I'm apologizing. Like, I'm feeling embarrassed. And my dad's like, well, I don't know why you even bothered made this. Your grandmother's a horrendous cook. Like, and these recipes should have died with her. Like, there's no reason for this to be happening. So just because you have somebody's old recipes doesn't mean that they're good. Keep that in mind. Go with Giada from the Food Network. So we also too have diaries and letters, journal entries. If you can find some of these are fun. Sometimes they're in shoe boxes. Sometimes they're inside of books, old books. If you have old books, just go through the pages carefully, see if anybody maybe have put something in there and maybe accidentally. In the background of this screen here is a 4-page letter that my grandma, I was just talking about, who can't cook, wrote to her parents when she was a freshman in Skidmore College in the 1930s. Now, that's also a big accomplishment for a woman to go to college in the 1930s. And in this letter, it's pretty cute. She talks about how they found a dog and they put him in the dorm room and the police came. And she asks if $10 is too much to spend on a hotel room. And she thanks them for sending up medicine because she was constipated, which she probably, sure, she was a very proper lady. And I'm sure she probably didn't realize that was in there. And I would be sharing this at a group of people 100 years later. So, and you kind of get a sense of who this person was. You can also tell by their, maybe their level of education, how they're writing. You know, just the
copied on piece of paper.
What's that?
Either way, that's not.
Oh, I think someone might be unmuted. But anyway, if you there's an interesting line in here, and it says, "Well, I must close now. Please reply as promptly as I did. Couldn't you take or borrow the car and come over to see me sometime?" By catching that line, that little line right there, is there any indication of what her possible relationship was with her parents?
I mean, it depends on how you want to take it. Like that could be like a very close family where they're just like, hey, you know, get back to me as quickly as I did. Or maybe there's some distance there.
Right. I mean, like for my mom, I'm like, Mom, let's go. Like, you know, like whatever. But what, this was my grandmother. She was the one who I said had the doll from her sister who died when she was 5. After her sister passed away, her mother really went, which I can't blame her. I would have really been devastated if my child died. But after Harriet died, she put my grandmother into a boarding home and would not take care of her anymore, and passed her around. So this is kind of like, you can kind of see that in this letter. She didn't come to her wedding, like, you know, just very distant. And you kind of get that. And I knew that going into this and reading this letter, and you could pick it up. Another collection of records I have was from my Nana. That's the lady I just was talking about, and my Poppy Paul. They're my great grandparents. My Nana had a one-night stand with a US soldier. That would be Poppy Paul. And she got pregnant with my grandma. So my great grandfather stationed over in France, and he's writing letters to her saying like, hey, I think you might've had that baby by now. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Like, what's going on? Hope you're good. Haven't heard from you. You know, like maybe you can write back. And my great grandma saved all these letters. And I'm like, aren't you embarrassed? Like, I would have thrown them out and been like, I never got your letters. Didn't write back to you. So I thought you were dead. But she kept them. And you can see they later got a divorce. But you can see that coldness that's there in these letters. And it, you know, on a census record, on a marriage record, you see these people are married, but you don't get to see that relationship that's there between them. So this is a sense into them. And even in those pictures, you see how people are leaning towards people, you know, how they actually, if they like, you know, somebody else in a picture. Now, if you can find a family Bible, this is like the ultimate treasure chest in your family. Family Bibles are where people would write down the events that happened, usually at the time or very close to the time when an event would be occurring. Excuse me. They write down things like birth, marriage, death, sacraments, where people were buried. And when you get one of these Bibles, if you're not really quite sure who it was, if you go to the opening page, a lot of times people will write, you know, this Bible was received by Joseph Baker on the date of his wedding, whatever. You can also look, and if there's nothing like that, check in the copyright page, see when the Bible was written, because that's also going to be an indication. If you're having somebody, which is something that happened in my family, the Bible was received 20 years after the kids were born. And there was some errors in the kids' birthdays based on that. So you can see, like, okay, like just because, you know, it's that person's family, maybe they didn't know the actual birthday. And I'm totally guilty of this too, because I mess up my husband's birthday all the time. I say his birthday is November 3rd, 1972, but it's really November 2nd, 1973. But I can remember all his dead ancestors, no problem, but I can't remember his. That drives insurance companies crazy, by the way. All right, so let's talk about marriage records. So this is a marriage record from Massachusetts in 1850. And can anybody tell me anything about Mary McLaughlin? What do you see on this just anything about her?
Ooh, it's her second marriage.
It is her second marriage, yes. How else,
She probably,
how else did you know that was her second marriage? I know it says second marriage. Any other clues that it might
oh, her last name doesn't match up with her parents.
Yes, very good. Her last name doesn't match up with her parents.
And even just her age.
Yeah, she's an old broad. I mean, I'm 38 right now, but back then,
Again,
you're an old lady. She was married before. She was from Ireland. She was married to this guy, Robert McLaughlin. Robert McLaughlin was going out hunting. She was holding their son. She waved goodbye to him. He waved goodbye to him. And as he did that, his gun accidentally fired off and he shot himself in the head and died. So her family then sent her over to Massachusetts, and she was married to Robert McColgan, who was serving as an indentured servant from the same village over there. That's the story behind that. So it was an arranged marriage, if you will. So her family, her parents were Patrick and Mary Doherty. You can, by knowing that, now keep in mind, women, if their husband died, would keep their husband's name. They wouldn't go back to their maiden name in most cultures. And I'll talk about that in a second. Oh, excuse me, just got a whole bunch of hair in my mouth. So you can go back and you can find the marriage record between her to Robert McLaughlin, her birth record, and then all this other fun stuff on there. Little interesting thing, which I found out, which really helped me, and I'll just share this in case it helps anybody else out. For Irish ancestry, people by the name of Mary were often referred to as Bridget also. So that could possibly blow the doors open right now for somebody's brick wall. And I hope that helps somebody, because it helped me. So with marriage records in our country, we started doing marriage announcements in the newspaper in the early 1800s, something that we've kind of like lost the art to these days of. There would usually be an announcement when somebody was engaged and somebody was married. So there's two separate announcements here. So this is Grandma again, the one who went to Skidmore College, the one who can't cook, and who has the sister who passed at an early age. Here is her articles. Can anybody tell me, reading these articles, anything about her that you learned and that you can maybe use to go find other records with?
Catholic.
Yeah, you're the first person to pick that out. Nice job.
Check out records in Pittsfield and White Plains.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Excellent. What was her job?
Lab tech.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think her and my grandfather met?
Probably White Plains.
Yeah, they both worked at the same hospital, which I was later born in. He was a landscaper, and she actually worked with his brother as lab technicians, and that's how they met. So kind of sometimes it'll tell you how a person met, sometimes they won't. But it's cute, like to be able to, I think, to know that. And there's a picture of her over there. They would often give pictures of the brides.
we've got a question in the chat. How do you find a divorce record?
Great question. They're extremely hard to find because there's 100-year privacy laws on them, and it's one of the hardest ones to find. So if it is in fact, been 100 years since the divorce took place, you can go to the archives of the state, or you can ask if you know where the actual town is where they would have filed for divorce, you can ask them there, but they're extremely hard to find. Another option for that is to check in the newspapers, because men would have to often say that they're divorcing their wife, or they're leaving their wife or whatever. I have this article of my great Aunt Honey. And Aunt Honey had an affair with the guy who created Lowe's movie theaters. And her husband put out an ad in the paper, and it's like her picture of her, like, and she's sitting so proper like this. And it's basically like, this woman's a tramp. Like, she cheated on me with this guy, blah, 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 left my, and like, they would say like, she left my bed. And it's like, whoa, okay. Like, that's very abrupt. But really, they just would just blow these women up. And there was, really no retaliation in this. So that was a lot of times they would say that. They would say it if they were filing for a divorce, if they wanted to have permission to remarry and they weren't, and they just didn't feel like doing it, they would also just say it to shame the woman, which is crazy. Women would not be able to do that, talking about the law and that playing into place then. Did I answer that question? And I can't see this chat, so I can't see this chat you speak of.
Hi, this happened in the early 1930s.
Okay, so you're not going to be able to find it yet.
Yeah, I found it on her a marriage application to marry the man that I thought was my grandfather and have come to find out is not.
Okay.
That my mother's actual natural father is the man that my grandmother divorced, or who they divorced.
Divorced from. Okay, so I mean, you could check the newspapers to see if he put any like file grievance against her.
Okay.
Public forum. But just mark it on your Google Calendar to send an alert when you're 100 years.
Are those restricted to family, or would they be open after 100 years?
I think they're public records after 100 years.
Public records, okay.
But that's also going to vary by state.
Yeah. How about for medical exams that are sealed? I have a relative that committed suicide, and I'd love to get the medical records, but I don't think that's accessible.
I don't know. Was that in New York, or where is that?
It was in New York in the 1950.
Okay. Because I was just working right now in Ohio, and I'm getting mental health records for somebody, and they had to have like right now they're cut off, but they were releasing the medical records to was they had to have died before 1911. So I'm not sure what it is, but you can always ask. And sometimes they have these special collections in the archives. And you can ask, like, for example, was it New York City or New York State?
New York City.
Okay. So I'm seeing it in my head and I'm forgetting the address, but it's in New York City. They have the New York City archives, and I don't think they're open. I know they're not open to the public right now, but they might be taking requests. Oh my gosh, what street is it on? Just Google New York City archives, and you can call them and say, do you have access to these records? Would you be able to send them to me? It's worth a shot. And
medical records are really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that engagement and marriage records, there's other times that your female ancestor will be seen in newspapers. Sometimes it was just whatever it was a slow news day. So they would just spotlight other people, especially in these rural communities. You're not having things like, big drug busts or murders happening. They spotlight old Mrs. Warner, who's still making rugs at 88 years old. Have her here. She's talking about how she has never seen a doctor and she's 80 years old. I had one where she refused to leave a church and she went on like this strike because they were going to like move her favorite statue to like a different spot in the church. And I was like, all right, lady. Like,
sounds like a pistol.
Yeah, she was full of it. And then, of course, your obituary. But these other, I really like these other articles because it really kind of gives you insight into their lives, what was important to them, their relationships too with other people. And a little like a pro tip is to search by Mrs. Because oftentimes I wouldn't be, you wouldn't find me as Sarah Gutmann if you're doing a search, but you could find me as Mrs. Gutmann or the wife of James Gutmann. So don't limit yourself.
Mrs. James Gutmann. That'd be very, very deep.
Yes, Mrs. James Gutmann. Another great resource, and this also ties back in with, and by the way, I'm going to tell you how to find these records too. It's not just you looking at stories of my family and like, great, now what do I do? If you go onto Google Books, which is different from regular Google. So go onto Google Books. This is me typing for you. Go onto Google Books, type in the area that you're interested in. This was from Cambria County, Pennsylvania. and they would have some of these books out. And what they do is for churches and towns would write these little yearbooks almost, or maybe some anniversary books. And they would spotlight the members of their community in them, especially their older members. So this is from a church yearbook from 1899. And they have this picture here of one of the women in the community. Talks about her children, her husband. She had 12 kids, only 2 of them survived, 2 of which were nuns. Gives a little bit about their parents, a picture. And I wonder if she was like, I really wish I had opened my eyes for this picture. But it gives you, again, some insight to them. And also, too, in the beginning of these books, they tell you about the community, what's going on. Again, you're getting that insight into the community. I have a few books behind me here about things. There was even one that, it's called In the Mill. And it's a book about the workers of the rug company that spun rugs in Yonkers at the turn of the century. And it's just interesting because somebody just wrote about like what life was like going into, the factories, and they're immigrant workers. And, things that we wouldn't consider maybe that would be published, worthy of a book, wasn't so back then. So it's a really fun thing to look at. And also you can Google the town, Google Books the town, Google Books by last name. See, maybe somebody else might have put in written a report about your family. Always fact check it too. But when you go into a town, once you click on the book that you're interested in, a little magnifying glass will pop up, and then you can type in the word of the person who you're interested in looking for. Again, think of not using the woman's last name, go by Mrs. whatever, and search for them that way. But it'll spotlight that. So you're not sitting there reading a 100-page book. And things that are written before 1924 are available to the public. There's no copyright laws. And a lot of these town books, even if they're written after that, are available to you. Now, this is a fun collection on This is a fun collection to play around on Ancestry. Ancestry has a huge collection that they added the last 2 years of yearbooks that go predate to 1905. So that's big. And it's high school, it's grammar school, and college. And this is my mom. And I do this because she doesn't come to my classes, even though I tell her she should. So I put her picture on here and she can't say anything because she doesn't know, but she's not here. So looking at this picture of mom, can anybody tell me about her? Anything about her? And you don't have to go by the picture either. You go by like the little words there too.
She was short.
She's short. She still is. And so am I. I'm not 5 feet tall yet.
Was she into theater?
She was, yeah. In the Step and Act stage was a local high school. How about her personality?
An
Full of life.
extrovert?
Yeah, so I heard an extrovert. What was the other thing?
Oh, full of life, just reading off.
Yeah, she's full of life. She never stops talking. And that's true. She like FaceTimes me 3 times a day. And she's like, what are you doing now? And I'm like, absolutely nothing. Like, I don't do anything. So I'm just sitting here with my hands like this now. Anyone want to take a guess of what PP and P were? She did not have a urinary tract problem. Those are the names of her dogs. And David was her boyfriend of 10 years. That is not my father. She's married to my dad for 40, but I guess 11/27/70 was her anniversary with David. But anyway, you're getting, again, this snapshot into somebody's life who you may have in your head always pictured as this older individual. And it really kind of gives them, it kind of brings them back to this other part of their life, which is fun to find. And you can find some really, I found this one picture of my uncle, and like, it's so from the 60s, it's ridiculous. And, we passed it around on like a text message, and he was like, that needs to leave right now. And I don't know how you people got access to this. So I was like, well, everybody can now. So
Just a comment, I have to tell you, I was surprised. I found a picture of my uncle from a Duke University yearbook in the early 40s that was online. I just stumbled across it, and there it was. I went, wow.
That's awesome. Was that on Ancestry or?
I can't remember. It was too long ago. You know,
Okay.
you could go, I can't remember that far back.
Yeah. If you go on Ancestry and you can access a lot of these from the library, go under search, go into the card catalog, and then you can go specifically into the yearbook collection to look
Oh,
at.
I think it was Ancestry, you know.
Yeah.
I got it for a month and then I realized I can get it through the library. So
Yeah. And you can I found my husband on there. I couldn't find mine. So yeah, there's cool stuff. Now lineage societies are really neat to find people in too. The DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, I'm a member of that, has a really great site. Now, even if you don't know if you had a family member who was involved in the American Revolution, what you can do is they have two databases. So you go to dar.org and there's a tab on the top that says genealogy. Click on genealogy and it'll give you a choice. You can either search by ancestor, and that's the ancestor who was involved in the American Revolution, or you can search by descendant. So what I do when I have a client that I'm thinking that may have been in this country for quite some time, for each generation that I have, I put the ancestor, maybe they were born in 1880. And I see if anybody else has applied to the Lineage Society using that ancestor, tracing their family tree all the way back. So say, for example, I could put in my great grandma, Romana Warner. I could put her into the ancestor search, and I have several other people, you know, I guess they're second, third cousins of mine, who have been members of the DAR, and they did the work to trace the line back into the 1750s. And you can buy for $15 the lineage with the proofs. And then, you know, if you want, you can go look at the proofs yourself, whatever. But it's kind of really cool to be able to find that. And then you can also look too, you know, for example, I knew that I had somebody in my family who was a captain. By doing the descendant search, by using other descendants of my family, I was able to find that I actually had 5 patriots involved in there. Now, they're not only something that is specific to this country. The Sons of Italy, and I know I'm saying Sons of Italy, they also had a type of lineage society. And people would come over and they would fill out a form saying who their father was, who their grandfather was. They would also name who their wives were on these forms. So again, you've got to know who their husbands were. And they could also say, I married the wife of Annunziata Isola, the daughter of Germano Isola from this town. So again, you're not getting as far back as you would with the DAR, but that could just be the ticket that you need to get your family over across the pond and see who they're referring to in the old country there. So that's a cool thing to play around with. There's a ton of lineage societies out there. Even just Google lineage society, you might find something that.
By the way, a little piece of local history. The current president of the DAR is a Dutchess County resident.
Oh, really? Okay.
Denise Van Buren. Her name is Denise Van Buren, and she's been.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know. Like I've heard her. I didn't know she was from there. That's so interesting.
Yeah, she's lives here.
Do you know her?
Sure.
Tell her I said hi.
Yeah, she's traveling all over the country. She's busier with the DAR than she was ever with Central Hudson, I think.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Tell her Sarah Gutmann from Long Island, from the Anna Smith Strong chapter said hello. Cool. What were they about to say? Oh, now these societies are also a little funny too, because I think we think lineage societies, we think like prestigious, right? Like, you know, they're very proud of it. Well, my grandfather's parents were also in a society. It's called the Cellmate Society. Has anyone ever heard of that society?
Afraid to ask.
So I thought that this is a prestigious society of like Italian immigrants, Hungarian, whatever. So my father's like, no. He's like, it was just a bunch of drunks during the time of Prohibition that would get together, and like they like said they were like this lineage society so that they could like operate, and they would have their meetings, they would drink, and they weren't tracing their family back at all. So just because they're in a lineage society doesn't mean they're actually like, legitimate. So if you happen to find cellmates in your family, that's what they did. Now, a thing to keep in mind is in many cultures, especially in Italy and in France, women are keeping their the maiden names when they're married. They would go by their married names sometimes, socially, because it's like, oh, the Gutmans are here, whatever. It's just easier to say. But keep that in mind. Do a little Google search in the area that you're looking for and see if what the tradition was in there. And the reason that's important is, and I'm going to get to that in a second, I just want you to remember that. It's so important to get to know the men in her life, fathers, brothers, sons, uncles, because you never know who she might be under in the record collections. And some things to think about when you're looking for her. Consider birth, baptismal, marriage, death records, passenger lists, naturalization records. Where's my water? I think my son took it on me because he steals everything of mine. Naturalization records. Now, women typically would not be registering for citizenship. They would be getting that through their husband. However, their husband, when you get these later, I would say after 1906, when they're filling out their naturalization form, they had to provide information on their wife. And they would say maybe sometimes who she was the daughter of. They would give where she was born, the town, and also her date of birth. So again, you never know if that's just the right information that you need to help you kind of make that connection to the other country. Draft cards. Now, obviously, women are not the ones getting drafted, but men would have what we would consider today your emergency contact. And quite often they would put down their mothers or their wives, and they would give their addresses and their names. So this is a really good proof of parentage. Draft cards are also a really great place to find the actual village of where someone was from another country. Pension records. Women were granted their husband's pension, especially if they were involved in the service, the military. If you're looking for Civil War soldiers, one of the best ways of finding them is through the widow's pension, which you can find through the library on the website Fold 3. It was once it's still owned by Ancestry, but now it's its own separate thing because they like extra money. But Fold 3. They also have it at the National Archives, but it's a little bit harder to obtain that way. Last will and testaments. Now, based on the time period and the geographical location of women, sometimes they would be able to write their own last will and testament, sometimes not. Sometimes they would be named as, they would be given the land or the belongings of somebody as an individual or under the care of somebody else. So say, my father wanted to leave me something, but he's not able to give it to me. He would say, I'm giving it to my daughter, Sarah, the wife of James Gutmann, to be, provided under his care. Or if I wasn't married, they leave it to my brother, Robbie, and have it passed down to me too. So you get to see who the guardian of the women were. Estate records, again, that's kind of the probate records, the last will and testament, and town and church publications. And again, we'll talk at the end about how you can find these things. So now, keeping in mind the relationship, the important women in men in the women's lives, I want you to look at this passenger list here. So I'm looking here at the Frigetti family. Okay, now you look at these kids over here. This is one of my great grandfathers coming over here. 6 years old. They cut the thing off. I guess they just didn't feel like bothering writing his names. He's 6 years old. He's 10. And then you see the brother here is 15. Now, it looks like these kids are coming over to America by themselves. Now, that actually was not that uncommon. I had one of my female ancestors came over to this country at 14 years old by herself. She was the first one in her family, and her family would come several years later after her. But at 14 years old, she got on a ship. I'd kill her. I would kill her. Like, I would come over here and be like, how dare you? Where did you get that money from? Where's my good Tupperware? So what you might think is they're traveling alone. However, if you were able to look at other records, I found out that this lady, Carmela Palladino, was their mom. Now, Carmela Palladino, if you didn't know any better, looks like she's married to Carmine Palladino. These two are actually brother and sister. This passenger list, because it's an earlier one, they don't provide you with the relationships. Later on, you get some really good passenger lists that even they tell you the physical description of the people on there, which is nice, where they're coming from, who they're coming over, how much money they have. But these earlier passenger lists, they don't have that. So it's important to look on the lines above and below to see if there's if they're traveling with their wife or their mother or sister, whatever, on there. She's actually coming over to this country and she's finding out that her husband's married to somebody else. So that's not great for her. And that's a whole other, like, what's going on in this woman's life. But anyway, she comes over to this country with her sons. Now, census records, they're also a fantastic, that's what I talked about, I think my last class here with census records, great resource for people. And here we have our friend Mary McColgan again, the one who was married before, whose husband accidentally killed himself. From this census record, and this I will say is uncommon, it does say the M2 on it because she was married twice on there. Coming from Ireland. This line is giving us that she's coming over in 1879. So that's also going to give me an indication of when I should be looking for her on passenger lists. Now, is her husband a citizen or not a citizen? And how do you know? And this will be my lesson from last class. Let's see who was paying attention to me.
Is there a column that's about naturalization? Are you naturalized?
Yes. Do you see where that is? It's right here.
So, or are you alien? Sometimes it says alien.
He's an alien, right? He is an alien, so there's really no sense in me looking for a naturalization record because he's not a citizen. Maybe down the road in the next census, he might be NA, naturalized. AL is alien. PA is they have applied for their first papers, or the number ones. Sometimes you'll see that in there. And it also tells you she is a laundress. And it's really interesting. Sometimes if you just Google these older professions, when I think of a laundress, I would think of somebody who works in it, like what we know as a dry cleaning business. But it was so much more meticulous and so much tedious, like just looking at how this was there. Now, another thing to remember is with censuses, I spoke about this last time, that prior to 1850, on the federal census, only the head of household was named, and that would be a male, a white male. Household relationships are not provided until the 1860 census. African Americans, as I mentioned earlier, very rarely were seen on censuses until the 1870s. They were also kept whether or not they were slaves, especially in the South, in their own separate books, because that's how separate they had it. So they're not even showing up in the same collections. They have these black schedules to find things in. And I'm just gonna, for anybody, if anybody here does have African-American descent, the Freedmen's Bureau, which was created after the Civil War, people would file under that to try to get assistance from the government. They would have to provide information about themselves. And you can do that if you're looking for African-American ancestry, women included, to check out the Freedmen's Bureau and see what information they've put on there.
Yeah, it's in Heritage Quest.
Oh, very good. Okay.
I
The Freedmen's Bureau?
believe so.
Okay.
So that's a resource you can check out for those.
Fun. All right, great. Thank you.
That is correct. And there's a lot of detail about where they live and relationships.
That's one of my goals for 2021 is to learn more about the African records because they're just so fascinating, and I'm really liking how they're getting a lot more spotlight. I don't know if that's the word.
There's more attention being paid.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting right now. Now, ladies in the law, these are things to consider about when you're looking for us in the records, because we may or may not be there based on the law. So these are just some interesting laws I've found. There's a ton of them if you have some time and you want to Google things. In 1664 in Maryland, Maryland declared that any Englishwoman who married a slave then had to live as a slave of her husband's master. So you couldn't free a slave by marrying them. You would actually become a slave yourself. So that really discouraged that. Later on, they're actually going to say if you marry a non-citizen of certain ethnicity groups, you will also lose your citizenship for certain groups, which is interesting. I don't have that one on here. In 1718 in Pennsylvania, married women were allowed to own and manage property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse. In 1838, Mississippi, the Married Women's Property Act grants married women the right to own, but not control property in her own name. So she would have to check with the person who is considered the guardian in order to do anything with that land. In 1850, Illinois, when Illinois opened up its first hospital for the mentally ill in 1851, the state legislature passed a law within 2 years of its passage that amended to require a public hearing before a person would be committed against his or her will. There's one exception though. A husband could have his wife committed without a public hearing or her consent. That could be for anything. I would be put in a mental hospital so quickly because I know you do anything. And I'm doing this, I mentioned earlier, I'm in the process of getting these mental records for a client from the Ohio State Insane Asylum. And the person there, now on the census record, they do have a column about if this person is quote unquote insane. She was never marked as insane. After her husband died, her husband in his will had granted her his land, his money, and said that her guardian was his son-in-law. Okay, and that he was in charge of her everything. About 2 weeks after the passing of this gentleman, the son-in-law had his mother-in-law declared insane, placed her into the asylum, and then took her money and ran. And then she died there 8 years later. And so I'm in the process right now of trying to obtain these records and just see like what happened, like what's going on, like what, she could possibly be mentally unstable and she needed assistance, but I don't know about you, like this is
us.
Yeah, this isn't cool. Meanwhile, I'm in the process of moving in with my mother-in-law, her coming in here. So who knows, maybe I'll commit her. I don't know. Don't tell her I said that. So in 1860, New York Married Women's Property Act granted married women the right to control their own earnings, but that sounds good. However, 2 years later, that whole thing's going to get overturned. Sorry, ladies. That was enough of that. So they're going to take it away. She loses equal guardianship of their children to have veto power over the apprenticeship. And it takes away that whole equality thing. Something I did find that's very interesting. So this dates back to 1816, okay? On my family, one of my ancestors died while giving birth. She had 5 children. Her husband had to petition to the court that he wanted custody of those children, that they would not be given away. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. That was in Pennsylvania. And I found that in what's called the orphans court. It really does not have to do with orphans, but it was a guardianship bond that was in there saying that he would take control of his children and he would care for them. And so that's an interesting find. So
you have to have an affirmative statement in order for a father to get the kids.
Yeah, which is like, because it sounds like from all this, like that the father's in charge of it, but I guess it's maybe their way of getting out of having to take care of their kids.
Well, I think a lot of them would like just sort of, if the wife died, find other relatives to take care of the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I got one more question from the chat.
Sure.
Can you address detainment of women who arrived in the U.S. with less than a certain amount of money or a local family member's contact information? They would be detained until someone came to retrieve them.
Very common. They would not allow women unless you had somebody at that gate at Ellis Island there to claim you. They would not let you go. So you had to have somebody there. Your family had to have arranged ahead of time. for them to say, and, even just a simple like, hi, like I'll pay you, $10, go there, wave at them and say like, yeah, she's mine. And then like, she can go on her way. But there is a record, there are detainment records for Ellis Island. And that doesn't mean that they were, bad or anything. They just had to wait till somebody would show up to contact them. And it usually was only within a 24-hour period. They weren't sitting there that is long. I would be really mad if I had to stay,
But where would they be detained if the ship had to disembark?
They would stay there. They would stay on Ellis Island. There was an area in there that they had like set up, I guess, like with cots, or even I guess like crude benches, and they would just stay there until they got somebody. I had found that with somebody I was researching that experience. Did you have someone in your family who had that?
I did. Yeah.
How long were they there for?
I think it was just one night.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think like that guy was he like, oh my God, I didn't realize that boat was coming in.
I had another question.
Sure.
I'm doing some research about a painter.
Okay.
Who was an elevator operator at a local college. And it shows that he came from Budapest with his wife. I found the paintings. It's a long story, but it's a wonderful story. So I found the paintings, and through I forgot what it's called, but the list of people on the ship that he came in, and the description, he had hazel eyes and gray hair. And so I know that one of the paintings I have is a self-portrait, and one is a painting of his wife. But on the record, it shows that number of pregnancies for his wife, and it showed 2, but it showed that there's a missing son somewhere. They didn't come with the son. And so I don't know but I would like to try and find him. And I don't really know how to proceed. Did they leave him in Budapest? What happens? I mean, did he pass away?
Could have died in infancy. Yeah, so
he could have died in infancy. My husband had on his side one of his ancestors went into early labor and gave birth on the boat. The baby was dead, and they threw it overboard, which happened more unfortunately than we think it did. And on the back of the passenger list for that boat, they put the names of the people who died on the ship. So that's, if you're on the passenger ship, you can click on the things and go back there. But yeah, I mean, they could have died in Budapest. What year were they coming over in?
I don't recall, just off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they could have, possibly you could look in records for Budapest to see if there's anything. You probably have to know the local village that they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. He was an iconic, he painted in Catholic Orthodox synagogue, or not synagogue.
You didn't talk about this before. I feel like I remember the story. I hope I didn't dream it and I'm like going crazy. Did you mention this in an earlier class?
No, this is my first attendance. So no,
I was talking with somebody else who was trying to get people in a painting.
Huh.
I should hook you guys up. I'll be like,
maybe it's
a very familiar story. That's why I'm like, this sounds so weird. Okay.
Because he did have a student locally.
Okay.
Anyway, my contact information is available. Feel free to share it.
I will. Also, too, did you check out Google Books for this? This would be a good Google Books thing.
Yeah, no, I didn't, but he was a fairly well-known painter, so I found some information, and actually he was supposed to have painted in a local church here.
Okay.
But the church is closed and I can't get in.
Okay. Also, to check local historical societies. See if they have records on them.
But is there a reason, if their son was living,
mm-hmm.
Was there something that might have prohibited them from bringing him over from Budapest with them?
I mean, maybe they might not have known what like life would have been like. I know my mom is always like, just leave them with me, you know, like
Yeah. Well, he came for a job.
he was older, or the father
The
was older.
husband, the painter, he came for a job actually.
He might not have wanted to leave his friends, you know. You're like
Yeah.
we
Okay.
have to kind of even just think of like what might be even today, you know.
Right. Right. That's true too.
And I think you see a lot more fluidity with kids moving to different relatives' households in earlier times, where, you know, if a family decides, you know, they've fallen on hard times and 2 or 3 kids just go and move in with an aunt or uncle. So maybe they just, you know, he's with some other relative possibly.
Mhm.
One thing I saw when I was at Ellis Island is they had these examination rooms, and they would actually turn people away and send them right back to the continents
Mhm.
if they had, you know, certain symptoms,
Dreaded eye
and
disease.
heart defects.
Hmm.
That was a
And
big thing.
they were doing their eye exams, and
They'd flip your eyelids over.
maybe they were afraid that child wouldn't pass muster and dad needed the
Yeah.
job. So
And turn them around. That's a really good hypothesis. I like that.
mm,
I mean, he could be anything. Like in the 1990s, my best friend was leaving. She was moving. Her family was moving to New Hampshire, and her sister didn't want to go because she had a shot at being the valedictorian. So she moved in with my aunt, you know, who had no relationship to her, you know, and just, you know, you got to just think that these people were, I'm silly to say, like they were people and they had like their own reasons for not wanting to go. You know, maybe he wanted to be valedictorian. I have no idea. So,
Mhm.
so just be going back to this, just be aware of like what the different laws were at the time. So you're not kind of spinning your wheels looking for something that doesn't exist somewhere. Places to find these records, familysearch.org, it should say familysearch.org, is always free. Fantastic record collections from all over the world to look in. You can also search individualized record collections to kind of narrow down your searches. Newspapers.com for looking for things like obituaries. Also through the library, they have, and whether this library or the library of the region that you're looking for, I always call them up and I say, hey, do you have access to maybe a database for your local newspapers that I can tap into as a guest? Because they might be the only places that actually have that. And I've mentioned before, if you live in New York, you can go to the New York Public Library website and you download a application. You send them a copy of your driver's license, and then you get your free New York Public Library card. And then you can go on their website and you can check newspapers for free all over America. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say America. I meant New York and New York City. And also if you're doing New York research, fultonhistory.org is a really great resource that's free. And it looks like it's broken because it's very old timey looking, but it's not broken. So check that out. You contact your local town clerks if you know where an event of a vital record happened. This is about 10 months faster and about $50 to $40 cheaper doing it this way than contacting it through the state. So it's good to always pinpoint the actual activity. Family Search Wiki, I've talked about in the past. If you go to Family Search Wiki, you can Google any particular area. I'm sorry, you can insert any particular area and they'll tell you what records were available for that time period and different record collections that you may want to look into. Ancestry.com, which you can access for free from the library, and Google Books that we talked about. And again, I'm going to send you a copy of this presentation. So if you missed anything, don't worry. You can always message me. And finally, let's just talk about DNA for a second. DNA is a great resource for just genealogy in general. Now, I know if you've taken, has anybody here taken a 23andMe test? Okay. If you've taken a 23andMe test, they do put you into 2 haplogroups, they call it. One is your parental haplogroup and one is your maternal haplogroup. And they say, okay, for your maternal haplogroup, this is your mother's line. And the people who fall, have that same gene are in this group here. But the problem with 23andMe is they are primarily a health-based company. They are not a genealogy-based company. So their stuff isn't really that clear. If you are looking specifically and only for your maternal line, you can go to familytreedna.com and order an MT with mitochondrial DNA test. And it will test only that line and connect you with other people who have that and make it more accessible for you to do that. Now, here's the problem. Has anybody here heard, this is I want everyone's participation. Has anybody here heard of Ancestry DNA before?
Yes.
Yes. And you're here, I'm guessing. Has everybody heard of 23andMe?
Yes.
Yes. Has anybody heard of familytreedna.com?
I have.
No.
Okay, very good. Okay, I'm seeing mostly no's. But the fact that a lot of people don't know about that is an indication that that's a problem. And yeah, it's a total problem on their marketing department, and somebody really needs to step up their A game here. But what's happening is because not a lot of people know about it, a lot of people are not testing with it. So they're not getting a really good pool to compare you to. So, you know, while it's a great idea, in essence, it's not really great because they're not really comparing it to other people. The other thing that they're doing, which I really think that they should be spending their time on marketing and not doing this, is they're giving you an option that you can either test 33 markers or you can test 111 markers, which is about double the price. And they're saying, you know, you test the more markers, the better your outcome's going to be. But again, if you pay for the higher test, if nobody else is doing that and nobody else in that sample pool has been doing that, that's not going to help you at all. So I just want to like shake the person who's like in charge of this business plan and be like, this is not good. So that the people at Shark Tank would just like eat them up. But anyway, that's that. So now, does anybody have any questions, any comments?
So I have a question about DNA.
Sure.
Just before my mom died, she told me that she had been adopted by the man that I thought was my grandfather.
Okay.
And she gave me some highlights of who her father, like where he lived and such, but never gave me his name.
Did she know his name or no?
She said that she did, and that he used to put it in the phone book in a certain way so she would always find him.
Wow.
I found a little address book from when she was a senior in high school, and I went through it, and I found this one name of a man who lived in the town where my mother said her father was found.
Okay.
Since then, I have had ancestry DNA done,
Okay.
and I have come up with there's 13 matches with the same name as this man.
Wow.
However, I got a copy of my mother's birth certificate before she was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And the first and middle names of the man are the same as the man in the address book, but the last name is different. So I'm a little confused since my DNA is pointing to the man with the name in the address book, but the name on her birth certificate, the last name is different. So how do I go about reconciling that?
My grandma, her birth name is different. Her is screwed up on that. I would go with DNA. DNA would overrule that. Now, question is possible that he changed his name at some point. He may have changed his name for that reason. And I've had situations like that happen. A man would change his name. Sometimes he does it. What year was this?
This would be in the early 1930s.
Okay.
Probably around 1931. The other thing I'm wondering about is there is a man with the same name as the one in the address book that lived in the same town as they would have lived in, but had a different family. So I'm wondering if maybe he changed his name because he might have had two families, and especially since my mother said he put his name in the address book and the telephone book in a certain way so she would know it was him.
Mm-hmm. Is that person coming up in DNA or no?
It's the same name as the one that I have the DNA to.
Okay, so that's the same one that you have the DNA to, but the person's name from the birth certificate is not coming up, right?
No, I can't find anything, nothing. And in all my DNA, and I have gone through like 1,000 matches, there is not one match to that last name.
Your grandmother's mother Grandma's mom, right? She may have also lied when she was doing the birth certificate because she didn't want people to know that that was the father.
No, this is my grandmother.
Yeah, maybe she didn't want them to know who the father was in the birth certificate. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So she just made up the name. Well, actually, on the birth certificate, it has my mother's name. It has information about my grandmother that matches exactly to my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And on the man that I think is my grandfather, from what records I have found on that name,
Mm-hmm.
they basically match him.
I think I'm confused. So there's record. I would still go with DNA because
Okay.
she may have been using somebody else's name.
Okay.
Either protect them or, you don't know if, somebody in her family would have she was worried that they were going to, seek vengeance on this person or whatever. Again, think about it from a person living, what would their mindset be? Why would they not want that? It makes sense, thinking about it that way, that I'm going to make up a name so that nobody's going to trace it back to him.
Okay, because this is the same one that I asked you about the divorce records that it says on her application for marriage to the grandfather that I knew, that she was divorced and that was her second marriage, but I've not been able to find any marriage certificate for her at all about a first marriage.
And where was she? This is New York City, right?
No, this is in Massachusetts.
This is in Massachusetts. Have you looked on what's that website? AmericanAncestors.org?
AmericanAncestors.org?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Check that one out. That's really good for Massachusetts vital records. Also, to have you contacted Massachusetts, the state records for that.
No, I went to the local. That's where I got the birth certificate from. Was the Vital Statistics Department.
Go to the state if you're not sure of where the actual record is, what town that actually happened in. Go to the state. You can go to the state website. You're going to have to show, since it's been 75 years, it'll be released. It's released. You can get a genealogy copy of that. You may or may not have to show proof of descendancy of them, but she's since passed. Just check, because they might have you, put in an extra death certificate or whatever, but you should be okay. But I would request it from Massachusetts if you can't find it on American Ancestors or Family Search, specifically under the Massachusetts records.
So basically I have to accept, I don't have to accept, but I have to just take the birth record that I have right now as her birth record, even though I'm pretty sure that her last name was different.
Yeah, I mean, take it for, it's hers, but I wouldn't be too hung up on the last name.
Okay.
Yeah, because go with DNA. And also, too, here's another thing. Back then, people would that's late enough where people would file, if they were changing their name, they would file with the court. So on a local court level, you could also see in court records if he petitioned for a name change. And sometimes if he petitioned for a name change, that would also have to be announced in the newspaper.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
No problem. I like it sometimes, I feel like I know what I'm talking about. Other times I'm like my husband asks a question, I'm like, I have no idea.
Follow the DNA. It's like follow the mark.
Yeah. Follow the DNA. What? I'll go upstairs in a minute, okay?
So I have a question. I have great aunts who lived in Lawrence, Massachusetts at the time of the Bread and Roses strike. And I was wondering if there's any way to find out what factory they work in, if they took part in the strike, and like if there are any records going through that.
I would check out Google Books. I would Google Books search about that strike in particular, see if there's anything on that, and also contact local historical society, see if they have anything. And also too, with these local historical societies, if you ask for what's called the vertical record, just say, do you have a vertical record on this family? It's pretty much people over the years have just found clippings or whatever, and they put them into a file like this.
Yeah, we call our surname files.
Oh, very good.
But yeah, most historical societies or genealogy societies will have files of just a last name, and there's not necessarily people that are connected to each other even in that folder. It's everyone they have information about with that last name, but it can be really useful, and you find a lot of things in there that you can't find in official sources.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I appreciate all the, everybody did a really nice job of participating. And
I guess I'd just say, I just got in a slew of death records that I requested, which are a great treasure trove. And I always go back to say, try to go get the original documents, no matter what you see or what kind of stories you're creating in your mind. I had a couple relatives that died in the around 1918, 19 something. Oh, maybe it's the pandemic back then. As a result of it. Well, the fact is, one of them fell down the stairs and broke her neck.
Really?
And you wouldn't know that unless you see the death record. And I had a relative that died by gas asphyxiation as a watchman in Brooklyn.
Really?
You wouldn't have known that without seeing the death record. So, it takes a few weeks. I find the state's very responsive on that. It's like $15 for the record, but it can be a treasure trove of information that really make you go, holy crap, I never knew that.
Yeah. You can try. Go ahead.
I had a relative whose cause of death was a streetcar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You see that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I think there was our local paper has streetcar accidents in it all the time around the turn of the century.
Wow, interesting.
That's actually, I did this history class on pop culture, and not pop culture like, Madonna and Lady Gaga, but like pop culture or whatever. But they were talking about how that's why like actual hospitals came up, like the way that we know hospitals today is when they started moving from like the horse and carriage to actual cars. That's when the thing came up. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting.
Also,
dying in car accidents.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also trivia, after the cars started rolling, it was a woman who had the brilliant idea to paint lines on the street.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
Because there were so many accidents. And do I remember her name? No. Is it in my file? Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
She took away all of our fun. It figures.
I know a woman also created windshield wipers.
Nice.
I'll leave it to the women to do the safety. It's like, guys, can you just turn the volume down, Ed? Sorry. I was going to say something. My father was always told that his great uncle died because a piano fell on his head. And they just always accepted that fact. And my dad had this, he was always kind of scared that pianos were going to, he'd be walking down the street and a piano fall on his head and crush him, like Uncle Aquilio. Well, Uncle Aquilio, the guy who died, was actually having an affair with his wife's boss. And I guess it was later found out, this is in a newspaper article, whatever. He jumped out the window when the boss walked in, and he was a lot higher up than I guess he had anticipated. I don't know. I have no idea. He's dead. But I guess he didn't make it. So, but my grandma didn't want to tell my dad that, because you don't really tell a kid that. She just said piano fell on his head. So.
Oh.
She was amazed that he still believed that after all those years. She's like, oh no, he was having an affair. Any other comments or questions or anything?
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes, Linda.
My maternal grandmother had a very common name, Mary Parker. Mm-hmm. And my mother and her sister, my aunt, really didn't know anything about her background other than she came from Staten Island. So I don't even know where to start.
What year was this around?
Well, late 1800s, early 1900s.
Okay. I mean, I would start with census records. That's always my best, and try to get mom with her mom on these census records. You can find them at Family Search, and use the census records as clues. Is it saying, some of them tell you when a person was married, if they were coming from this country, just kind of tracing it backwards and using those as clues as other things. Okay. Do you have an idea of when she passed or no?
Yes, 1943.
Okay, she passed in where did she pass?
In Poughkeepsie.
Oh, she did in Poughkeepsie. Okay. So what I would do is, so that's obviously 50 years. I'm just thinking of the I would write to Poughkeepsie, the city clerk, and ask for her death record.
Okay.
And that's going to tell you her parents, when she was born, her parents' names, where she was born, possibly his name, and yeah, you can get started from that way. And then check out the library with the databases that they have available for the newspaper, and use that. See if you can find an obituary, which is also a great source of information for her.
Yeah, you can always send me requests, and I look in the newspaper. We do have institutional access to the Poughkeepsie Journal up to 1922, but beyond that, you'll have to request it from me directly because they don't have a public subscription for those years. But we also have an obituary index, so we can look up names that way, and I can just do keyword searches in the database, which brings up all kinds of interesting stuff.
Okay, thank you both.
But I think you'll find some good hits. You're definitely late enough that there's going to be records, so that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody
I
else?
have a question.
Sure.
My mother
Okay.
was, I was able to find the census records that listed my mother, and her father.
Okay.
A couple of years after that census, her father left her at an orphanage.
Hmm.
And that is where everything stopped. And so I have been able to follow her time in the orphanage and in her schooling. I've been able to trace that, but I can't go back to her mother or her father. On the census, it listed that her mother was an immigrant from Germany and had come here in 1890.
Okay.
But that's it. No name. No maiden name.
When was she put into an orphanage, your mother?
I do have that date. It was, well, my mother was born in 1908 and she was put in the orphanage in 1912.
So I'm thinking now, do you know why she was put in the, or did her parents pass?
I think her parents split.
Mm-hmm.
And her older sister, I believe, because my mother never owned up to any of this when she was alive. So this is all found afterwards. She had a lovely childhood, according to the stories that I heard. But I believe that her sister probably went with her mother. I think it was a biracial family.
Okay.
And I keep finding the person who is listed with the same name as her father in North Carolina with a family that have ages, birth dates that are different than my mother's. So he either had a second family down there already, or he started another family down there.
Now, have you taken DNA or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm finding
Have you
people, but
been able to do what's, there's this thing where you're able to take the different DNA and put them and identify the 4 different grandparents and see which lines they're coming from and all those people who are matching that. Have you been able to do that?
oh, I haven't tried doing that. So that's something. Okay,
Yeah.
so
It's called the leads method. You can watch it and you'll have to, it's one of those things that like, you're going to have to like stop and start and be like, what just happened here?
okay.
But you can YouTube it, and so it's LEEDS. It's called the leads method.
Okay.
And you take an Excel spreadsheet and based on the centimorgans, the CMs on there, you're able to find out which matches pair with which grandparent.
Oh,
So
okay.
that would help you kind of narrow that down.
Yeah.
And then create it that way. There's also a website, DNA Painter, and you can go. A part of it. Oh my gosh, is it a DNA Painter? I think it's DNA Painter. What it allows you to do is take your matches, and it gives you a hypothetical. Would tell you like if this hypothetical relationship would be possible.
Okay.
that. Like if you pull it around, like, okay, would this be, like, you can kind of like drag it to like, is this person my second cousin? It would say like yes or no, and like the percentage
Okay.
of that.
And
So
that's
definitely
called
try that
what?
out.
What is that called?
A painter, but I would definitely try first yourself doing the leads method. That's
Okay.
just watch some videos on it, and that'll be helpful for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Now I'll go back to mute.
Okay. I wish my children would go back to mute, but they don't.
I would like to throw something out there.
Sure.
Like all of the electronic, digital resources we have are really, really valuable, but so is just like talking to people.
Absolutely.
I went for a walk at Warriors Park one time and then intersected with these two Hasidic boys who were on bicycles, and we just got in a conversation, which is really unusual, and because it's not really allowed for them to speak to someone outside of their community. And so they said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, Where? Do you know where, from where you come?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, Poland, and other places, but I said Israel and Poland and so on. And where, do you know where in Poland? And I said, yes, Rodzman, the name of the town, and I said, yeah. And my great grandfather was a rabbi. Who was this? And the attitude. I said, Ashinsky, Rabbi Ashinsky. And they looked at each other and their mouths hung open. And they knew of him.
Really?
Yeah, they knew of him.
Cool.
And I said, yeah. And they said, tell him, we want to know more, and it was so unusual.
Yeah.
So I said, next time I come, I'll put my information in my glove box in my car, and I'll take it and I'll show you. But it never happened. But there's a large group. They come for a picnic at Warriors Park. I don't know if it's every summer or whatever, but I will keep an eye out for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so talking, and then this painter who was an elevator operator, I saw through a college newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
He was written about. So I researched the author of the newspaper article, of the college paper article, found her through a professional organization, Women in Neuroscience.
Wow.
She was one of the first brain surgeons in the United States. And so I found the college where she was teaching and had retired, spoke to an administrative assistant in her department who was very fond of her and knew where she was living in an assisted living place. I called the assisted living place, ended up speaking to her.
Wow.
To see if she remembered anything about that, but it just, and then she said, she told me a little bit, but then her life story was amazing. And so the storytelling part of it, I think, is so valuable. And I put in the chat, the Show Off Foundation has recorded interviews with.
Loser?
You don't know. Oh.
I think she might have been having connection issues earlier, so we might have lost her.
My thing had to.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. That's very interesting. All right. Well,
I think we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is wonderful. And thank you, Kira, for setting this up again. Hopefully.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Sarah for joining us, and for all of you for coming together on this Friday afternoon. This one was a really great one.
Thank you.
I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. And I'm going to connect with Sarah and see what else she's got on offer, and see if we can get her back in a couple months, because I think she does a great job.
Thank you.
And it's been a wonderful series. So
awesome.
And I put this in the chat too, but if there's topics that you're interested in, email me and I'll see what she's doing, and we'll see what we can work out. And this recording will probably be up on our YouTube channel next week. And I'll get the presentation notes from Sarah, and I can send that out to you if you're interested as well. And yeah, everybody, enjoy your weekends, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And please, I cannot get out of my thing right now to even put my information on there, but when I send out the slides of my email.
Yeah, I could.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.